Hey everyone! Welcome back to another chilling tale that will leave you with goosebumps. This time we're diving into the mysterious experience of a young man named Zhao La. Get ready for a story filled with suspense and the unknown. Zhao La received a message from a childhood friend inviting him to a baby's 1-month celebration. Since he had some annual leave from work, Zhao La decided to take the time off and return to his hometown. He was excited to attend the celebration and catch up with his family and relatives, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. After arriving back home, Zhao La attended the baby's celebration and spent some quality time with his relatives, visiting and reconnecting with them. It was a joyous occasion and he was happy to be back in his hometown. As Zhao La's vacation was about to end, something unexpected happened. His uncle had a dream the night before, in which their grandfather appeared and expressed how much he missed his grandchildren. The dream felt so real that Zhao La's uncle decided to gather the entire family for a visit to their grandfather's grave the next day. It was the perfect opportunity as all the grandchildren were already in town. The family prepared everything they needed for the visit: joss paper, alcohol, fruits, and other items for the ritual. Early the next morning, the entire family, including Zhao La, his cousin, uncles, and father, set off in a few cars. They drove to the foot of the hill, where the road ended, and then began the hike up the narrow and steep hill path. The path was challenging, and everyone was carrying something. Some held joss paper, others carried bottles of alcohol or fruits. It was a slow and steady climb, but there was only one path to follow, so there was no chance of getting lost. After about 20 minutes, they reached a flat area at the halfway point. From there, it was just a short walk to the right, and they would arrive at their grandfather's grave. As they prepared to start the ritual, they realized they had forgotten their innocence. The elders turned to Zhao La, knowing he was tall and could move quickly. "Zhao La, you go back and get it," they said. Without hesitation, he took the keys and headed back down the hill to the car. When Zhao La reached the car, he grabbed the incense and locked the vehicle. Before heading back up the hill, the sun had risen by this time, and the path was clearly visible. He knew the way well, having visited his grandfather's grave at least once or twice a year. The path was straightforward, with no forks or turns leading directly to the gravesite. But as he walked, something felt off. He walked and walked, but he didn't see the flat area at the halfway point, where they had stopped earlier. The surroundings began to look unfamiliar. He kept walking, feeling increasingly uneasy. "I can't have taken a wrong turn," he thought. "There's only one path. How could I get lost?" He quickened his pace, his heart pounding. He checked his watch and realized he had been walking for over half an hour, much longer than the initial trip with his family. The path was still the same, but the environment felt strange and unfamiliar. He was sure he had never been in this part of the hill before. Zhao La's anxiety grew with every step. He had walked much farther than he should have, and he still hadn't reached the familiar flat area or seen any sign of his family. The path seemed endless, and the surroundings felt eerie and unwelcoming. "Where am I?" he muttered to himself. "This doesn't make sense. I know this path. I've walked it so many times." He continued to walk, his mind racing with questions and fears. The path seemed to stretch on forever, and the silence was deafening. Zhao La felt a chill run down his spine, and he knew something was terribly wrong. At that moment, Zhao La began to shout. He called out to his relatives several times, but no one responded. Frustrated, he quickly took out his phone, intending to call his family to let them know that he couldn't find them and ask where they had gone, fearing they might worry. However, when he pulled out his phone, he saw that there was no signal at all. He couldn't make a call. He slowed his pace, fiddling with his phone as he continued up the hill. After walking for a few dozen steps, he noticed a relatively flat area ahead and decided to go there. Upon arrival, he realized that this wasn't the spot where his family had been. Although it was a platform, his family wasn't there. Instead, he saw an elderly woman, probably in her 60s, burning joss paper. Zhao La quickly approached her and politely asked, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm here to visit the graves at the cemetery on the mountainside. Could you tell me how to get there?" The old woman looked at Zhao La and said, "You've gone past it. You're almost at the top of the hill. You need to go back." Then she added, "Hurry up and go down the hill. Don't look back. Just go." She kept urging him to hurry down the hill and threw in a warning. "Don't look back." Jala was puzzled by her words but knew he had gone too far. He thanked the old woman and turned to head back down the hill. However, after just a few steps, he couldn't help but think about her strange instructions. The more she said not to look back, the more curious he became. Unable to resist, he glanced back. In that instant, he saw something that shocked him deeply, a scene he would remember for the rest of his life. He had only walked a few steps down when he turned his head and saw that the old woman was now surrounded by a group of people all squatting. They had appeared out of nowhere, stretching their necks and reaching into the fire to grab the ashes of the burned joss paper, then stuffing it into their mouths. This bizarre sight of people eating ashes of joss paper gave Jala goosebumps. He felt something was terribly wrong and dared not look anymore. He turned and began to run down the hill. After just a few steps, he felt someone push him from behind. In a moment of panic, he tripped and fell down the hill path, landing in a daze and pain. Although he wasn't completely unconscious, he was disoriented and in pain. He heard people calling his name, someone pulling him, lifting him, and carrying him while calling out to him. But he couldn't open his eyes due to the pain and dizziness. These memories were still there when he finally came to his senses and found himself in the hospital with his father, mother, and aunts by his side. When they saw he was awake, they asked how he felt and if he was in pain. He replied that he was okay. The family breathed a sigh of relief. Later, Jala asked his uncle how he ended up in the hospital and what had happened that day. It was then that his uncle recounted the events to him. That day, the whole family was waiting for Jala to come back with the incense at the halfway point on the hill. After waiting for a long time and not hearing from him, they tried calling his phone, but it was unreachable. They decided to send his cousin to look for him. Just then, they faintly heard Jala shouting, but his voice was distant and seemed to be coming from higher up the hill. The family was puzzled, wondering how he could have gone up the hill when they hadn't seen him pass by on the only path leading to their spot. They kept calling out to him, but there was no response. Worried, they started walking up the path, calling out his name. After a while, they found Jala lying, unconscious by the side of the path, having fallen and scraped his arms and legs. Strangely, there was a trail of burned joss paper leading up the hill from where he fell. Frightened by the sight, they quickly carried him down the hill and rushed him to the hospital without even completing the ritual. When he woke up in the hospital, they asked him what had happened, but he couldn't explain. He had walked up the hill without seeing the family, tried to call but had no signal, and shouted but didn't hear any response. The family said they heard him shouting, but he didn't respond when they called back. If they hadn't heard his shouts, they might not have found him unconscious on the hill. It was all very strange, especially how they could have missed each other on the same path. And then there was the old woman and the group of people eating ashes of joss paper. It was terrifying. Fortunately, the hospital check showed that Jala only had some minor injuries. He stayed in the hospital for over a week before being discharged. During his stay, he recounted his experience to his family, who were shocked. After he was discharged, they all went back to the hill to burn paper for his grandfather, hoping for his protection. They also told him about the incident at his grandfather's grave. The family walked up the path with Jala, trying to find the spot where he had seen the old woman burning paper, but they couldn't find it. They eventually gave up and went home still puzzled. Jala's uncle gave him a small bagua mirror, saying it could ward off evil spirits, and told him to hang it at his home in Guangzhou. Jala took extra leave from work and returned to Guangzhou, resuming work on Amen Day. It was September 4th, and he found himself swamped with work, only finishing and leaving the office around 10. When he got to his neighborhood entrance, it was almost 11. He noticed remnants of burned paper and incense on the ground, and remembered that it was the 14th day of the 7th lunar month, known as the Hungry Ghost Festival in Guangdong. Feeling uneasy, he hurried home. As he entered the building, the elevator arrived just in time. However, when the doors opened, He saw several unfamiliar elderly people inside, holding incense and joss paper. The sight was eerie, especially since it was late at night, and he didn't recognize any of them. He waited for them to leave the elevator, and then tried to use it himself, but the buttons wouldn't light up. Feeling scared, he decided to take the stairs instead. Once home, he went to bed but had a nightmarish experience. He dreamt of the day he visited his grandfather's grave and saw the old woman and the people eating paper ashes. In the dream, he had a bird's eye view of himself talking to the old woman and then walking away. The old woman looked worried as the others greedily ate the ashes. When he looked back, they all stopped and stared at him. The old woman frantically threw more joss paper into the fire, but the others started chasing him. She tried to push him to hurry, but he slipped and fell. She then threw handfuls of joss paper into the air, distracting the others and causing them to chase her up the hill instead. Zhao La woke up, his heart pounding, and called his family to tell them about the dream. His parents reassured him that it was just a misunderstanding and told him to hang the Bagua mirror at his door, as his uncle had suggested. He did so and hoped never to encounter anything strange again.